Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy, and relax, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. I'm a 23-year-old guy living in a small town in Norway. English isn't my first language, so bear with me if my words don't always flow perfectly. This story happened during the summer when I decided to head back to my parents' place. I was studying at a university that gave us a long summer break, and I was thrilled at the idea of seeing my family again. I hadn't been home since Christmas. The train ride took about 9 hours, but I enjoyed every minute of it thanks to an awesome Spotify playlist I put together. It had been 3 years since I lived with my parents, and while I loved the independence of living alone, I was grateful they had a basement that was practically its own apartment. It had a bathroom, living room, and kitchen, everything I needed. The setup was unique. You couldn't get to the upper floor of the house without going outside, climbing some stairs, and entering through the main door. Likewise, my parents couldn't get into the basement without going outside, down the stairs, and through my front door. This made the basement feel completely separate, like a proper stand-alone apartment. When I arrived, I barely made it through the door before my mom rushed out to greet me, her face lighting up with joy. She said she was glad I got there before she and my dad left for their trip. Damn, I'd completely forgotten they were heading to Spain for 2 weeks with my grandmother. I didn't mind being alone in the house, though. In fact, it felt like the perfect chance to invite some friends over and throw a small party. That first night, I slept like a rock, completely at ease in a familiar space. I even woke up early enough to drive my parents to the airport, wishing them a safe trip with hugs and smiles. After dropping them off, I headed back home and spent the entire day glued to my computer, playing Counter-Strike with my buddies. I brought my gaming laptop from uni, a solid machine that could handle anything I threw at it. To give you a better sense of the place, let me describe the basement's layout. When you walk in, there's a long hallway. Straight ahead is my bedroom, positioned so I can lie in bed and see the front door. To the right, along the hallway, is the bathroom. To the left, right next to the bedroom, is the entrance to the living room. I was in the living room, deep into my game, when I noticed it had gotten dark outside. I've been playing all day, and exhaustion hit me hard. I shuffled to my bedroom, collapsed into bed, and fell asleep almost instantly. Then, out of nowhere, I jolted awake. A strange noise had ripped me from sleep. It's hard to describe. It was so clear, yet unlike anything I'd heard before. Imagine the sharp, delicate sound of a needle tapping a light bulb, a faint metallic chime against glass. It felt like it came from right beside my ear, inside the bedroom. My heart raced as I fumbled for the light switch. I scanned the room, looking for anything that could have caused it. I was alone, no pets, no neighbors within a kilometer. It was 2:30 a.m., the dead of night. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The front door to the apartment was wide open. At first, I felt a wave of anxiety, but then I remembered I'd left the door open all day. It had been warm, unusually so for Norway, and I'd propped it open to cool the place down while gaming. I must have forgotten to close and lock it before crashing. Breathing a sigh of relief, I got up to shut the door and go back to sleep. As I walked down the hallway, passing the living room entrance, my heart nearly stopped. Music blared from inside, so loud it felt like the whole town could hear it. It was a woman singing opera, her voice high-pitched and piercing. My PC was hooked up to speakers, but I never turned them up that loud. And how the hell did music start playing on its own? As I walked by, I rushed into the living room and saw the song title on the screen, Secret Garden. To my shock, it wasn't playing from Spotify, it was a YouTube video. What the hell? My mind raced. Had someone noticed the open door, slipped past my bedroom, opened my laptop, and decided to blast opera music? It made no sense. The song wasn't on any of my playlists, and I never heard it before. I quickly closed the browser, silencing the music, and stood there trying to process what had just happened. I walked back to the hallway, closed and locked the front door, then turned on every light in the apartment. I searched every room, the bedroom, bathroom, living room, kitchen, looking for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. I even checked the white carpet in the hallway for footprints, knowing it would show tracks easily. There wasn't a single mark. I sat there, replaying the events in my head. That sound, those three soft chimes, like metal on glass, still echoed in my mind. It was so vivid, so real. And the music starting the exact moment I passed the living room, there was no one there to trigger it. I tried to rationalize it. Could someone have hacked my PC or used remote software like TeamViewer? No way. I worked in IT for 2 years. I know my tech. My laptop was clean. No viruses, no remote access software. Besides, even if someone had hacked me, it wouldn't explain the noise that woke me up. That sound didn't come from the computer. It was too close, too physical. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I'm not religious. I'm a man of science studying psychology at uni. I know how the brain can trick us, making us hear or see things that aren't there. But this was different. The chimes were crystal clear, and I was fully awake when the music blasted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I've never experienced anything like it since. My mom often complains about the light bulbs in the basement burning out quickly, even after replacing them. She insists it only happens down there. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for that, but my experience, I challenge anyone to explain it. The memory of those chimes still haunts me, as does the inexplicable timing of that opera music. It's like the apartment itself was trying to tell me something. I don't know what to make of it, but it's left me questioning things I never thought I'd question. It all began in July 2016, during a sleepover with my friend, who I'll call Jay for privacy reasons. Jay's family owned about 15 acres of land, with 4 acres covered in dense forest. We loved setting up tents in that forest for camping adventures, feeling like we were explorers in our own little world. On this particular Friday night, we pitched our tent under a massive tree that stood out for its strange decorations. Dream catchers hung from its branches. No one, not even Jay's family, knew who put them there or why. They just dangled, swaying in the breeze, adding an eerie charm to the spot. Around 12:30 a.m., we decided to take a walk up the long driveway that stretched from the forest to the main road. We grabbed our flashlights and set off, the beams cutting through the dark. As we walked, an uneasy feeling started to grow in our stomachs, like a knot tightening with every step. The further we went, the stronger it got. Our flashlights began to flicker, their light dimming and stuttering until, at the end of the driveway, they went out completely. The sudden darkness made us pause, and we decided to turn back, chalking it up to bad batteries or faulty wiring. When we returned to the tent, something caught our attention. We stashed our backpacks inside and started circling the tent, curious about the area. That's when we saw it, glass and string scattered on the ground. We looked up, and every single dream catcher was gone, their remains crushed into the dirt below. We tried to brush it off, blaming the wind, but the air had been still all night. Shrugging uneasily, we crawled back into the tent. By 2:30 a.m., we were ready to call it a night. As we settled in, trying to drift off, we heard leaves crunching outside. At first, I thought it might be Jay's dad, who loved pulling pranks to scare us. Jay, picking up on the same thought, yelled out, "Dad, we know it's you. Go get a life." But there was no response. No laugh, no footsteps retreating, just silence. We tried to convince ourselves it was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, but as we listened, the sound became clearer. Whatever was out, there was walking on 2 legs, circling our tent with deliberate steps. The crunching went on for an hour and a half, a slow, relentless pacing that kept us on edge. Finally, I'd had enough. I crept to the tent's window, heart pounding, and peered out just as the footsteps seemed to approach the door. But there was nothing, no figure, no tracks, no sign of anything. I lay back down, and the sound stopped, leaving an eerie quiet. The next morning, we marched up to Jay's dad, ready to call him out. Jay smirked and said, "Nice try scaring us last night." I chimed in, "Yeah, why were you out there for so damn long?" An hour and a half seriously. But Jay's dad just stared at us, his face clouded with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he said. "I was asleep all night. I wouldn't be out there that long." Jay and I exchanged worried glances, the weight of his words sinking in. We didn't stick around to investigate further. I had to head home, leaving the mystery unresolved. About a month later, Jay and I had mostly pushed the incident to the back of our minds. We planned another sleepover, this time at his house. I had a cast on my foot from a recent injury, so we couldn't do much. Crutches were easier to manage than a wheelchair, which was too much hassle to bring over. It was another Friday night, and around 12:30 a.m., we were bored out of our minds. Jay's parents had explicitly told us not to go outside, but we were restless teenagers, so we decided to sneak out. Navigating with my crutches and cast was a challenge, but we managed to slip out without getting caught. We started walking up the driveway again, chatting about typical teen stuff, school, crushes, dumb jokes. But as we got further, that same sickening feeling hit us, twisting our stomachs. The memory of the Dreamcatcher night flooded back, sharp and unsettling. Then a loud bang echoed from the end of the driveway. We froze, our eyes darting toward the sound. In the darkness, we saw something, 3 glowing eyes staring back at us. My body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Jay was shouting, "We gotta go now." His voice snapped me out of it, and we bolted back to the house, my crutches clattering as I struggled to keep up. Nothing else happened that night, but we didn't dare go back outside. We stayed in, hearts racing, trying to pretend it was just our imaginations. On September 16, 2016, we had another sleepover, this time celebrating the day I got my cast off. My leg muscles were weak, and walking was painful, but I powered through. We were determined to face whatever was out there, so we set up our tent in the woods again, this time prepared. We brought extra flashlights, kept our phones charged, and stayed alert. Strangely, nothing happened that night. No sounds, no eyes, no uneasy feelings. It was almost disappointing, like we'd geared up for a fight that never came. But on October 8, 2016, things took a turn. Jay, another friend we'll call Will, and I were hanging out at Jay's place. We spent the day messing around, doing dumb challenges like eating 10 warheads at once, laughing until our side hurt. As night fell, we were sitting around talking when we heard a rattling sound from the barn, like a door slamming shut. We went quiet, listening intently. The barn was 2 stories, and earlier that day, we'd been up on the top floor. We made sure to close the stairwell door when we left, but now we weren't so sure. Grabbing a knife for courage, I led the way to the barn, with Jay and Will trailing behind. When we got inside, 2 things stood out. The stairwell door was wide open, and we could hear footsteps creaking on the floor above. I took a deep breath and started up the stairs, step by cautious step, the knife gripped tightly in my hand. When we reached the top, the room was empty. No one was there. I glanced out the window into the yard and saw something, a white figure, fleeting and ghostly. I blinked, and it moved. I looked again, but it was gone. I told Jay and Will what I'd seen, and we decided to head toward the yard to investigate. Will was freaking out, begging us to go back to the house, but Jay and I refused. Then Jay shouted, "Run," and we sprinted back, panic driving us. Gasping for breath, I asked what the hell he'd seen. His voice shook as he said, "It was something in a white outfit. Glowing white with 3 eyes." My stomach dropped. Will demanded to know what was going on, so we filled him in on everything, the dream catchers, the footsteps, the eyes. He lost it and left Jay's house, refusing to stay another minute. I wish I could say that was the end, but it wasn't. On October 22nd, 2016, we had a sleepover at my house. Nothing strange happened that night, but it seemed to trigger something. Ever since, Jay and I have been hearing screams at night, blood-curdling, inhuman sounds that our families can't hear. The disturbances escalated at Jay's place. One night, he saw a white figure near the barn, but when he blinked, it vanished. On October 27, 2016, one of his sheep was found dead on the ground. No explanation, no signs of attack. Around the same time, I was drinking a can of Dr. Pepper at my desk. I stepped away briefly, and when I came back, the can was upside down. The soda spilled everywhere. Thankfully, it missed my computer, but I was shaken. I have no idea what's going on, but whatever it is, it's not done with us. I grew up in Canada, near the escarpment, a rugged, mountainous region blanketed with thick forests and dotted with sprawling farm fields. When I was 9 years old, my uncle worked at one of those farms, tending to crops and livestock under the vast open sky. One summer day, with his employer's permission, he brought me and my 3 cousins along to the farm. We were allowed to play freely, but he gave us one strict rule: stay away from the sparse forest that sloped down from the mountains to the road. He also warned us not to cross the road to the other side of the forest, where an old abandoned barn stood, its weathered frame a silent warning. My uncle didn't explain why, but his tone was serious, and we nodded in agreement, eager to get to our games. After the brief warning, my uncle and the other workers headed off to their tasks, leaving us kids to our own devices. We started playing hide and seek in the cornfields, the tall stalks swaying around us as we laughed and darted through the rows. The game was thrilling, each of us trying to outsmart the others with clever hiding spots. But as we played, we drifted closer to the forest's edge, the cornfields giving way to the shadowy trees we'd been told to avoid. By late afternoon, our game had spilled into the forest itself, the rules of hide and seek forgotten in the excitement of exploring the forbidden area. When it was my turn to hide, I sprinted deeper into the forest, determined to find the perfect spot. My heart pounded with the thrill of the chase, and I pushed through the underbrush until I stumbled upon a large, faded red barn at the forest's edge. Its roof had caved in, and gaping holes marred its weathered walls, giving it a haunted, forgotten look. To my 9-year-old mind, it was the ultimate hiding place, a spot so daring that my cousins would never find me. I imagined the bragging rights I'd earn, the way I'd boast about being the bravest and coolest for hiding in the creepy barn. With a smug grin, I slipped inside and made my way to the back, where I found a cramped stable. I tucked myself into a corner, crouching down to stay out of sight. The air carried a strange, musty smell, but I ignored it, too focused on the glory of my victory. The discomfort was worth it for the win. I settled in, the stable's dim light and quiet surroundings lulling me into a sense of calm. Being narcoleptic, I often fell asleep in cozy or comfortable places, and despite the barn's eerie vibe, the corner felt oddly snug. Before I knew it, I dozed off, my head resting against the rough wooden wall. When I woke up, the world was pitch black. The barn was shrouded in darkness, and the forest outside was silent. I blinked, disoriented, realizing I must have slept for hours. My cousins probably couldn't find me and gave up, I thought, a pang of disappointment hitting me. I wanted to gloat about my genius hiding spot, but now I just felt alone. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, a chill ran through me. I wasn't alone. Across the stable, against the opposite wall, sat a man, his eyes fixed on me. He looked young but exhausted, his face pale and drawn, like someone who hadn't slept in days. There was something off about him, an unsettling energy that made my skin crawl. My heart raced, and I nearly screamed, but my throat tightened, trapping the sound. I took deep breaths, trying to steady myself. I'd been taught some basic self-defense moves, and I figured I could kick or punch hard enough to escape if I had to. I steeled myself, ready to fight, but all that confidence crumbled when the man stood up. He staggered, his movements unsteady, as if he might collapse. Panic surged through me, and in a burst of adrenaline, I started kicking the wall behind me with both feet, putting all my strength into it. To my surprise, the old wood splintered and gave way, creating a jagged hole. The man lurched toward me, his steps heavy and deliberate. I didn't think, I just acted. I dove through the hole, the splintered edges scraping my skin as I tumbled out into the night. Scrambling to my feet, I ran, not daring to look back. My legs burned as I sprinted along the road, keeping to the forest's edge, the barn fading into the distance behind me. I told myself that if he was chasing me, he'd lose me in the cornfields. I plunged into the stalks, the tall plants closing around me like shield, and kept running, driven by pure instinct. Through the corn, I saw faint lights piercing the darkness like slivers of hope. I followed them, my breath ragged, until I burst out of the field and saw the farmhouse. The first person I spotted was my mom, standing near the porch, her face lit by the glow of a lantern. I didn't stop running until I crashed into her arms, clinging to her as if my life depended on it. Safety washed over me, but my heart was still pounding. It took a moment to notice the two police officers standing nearby, their faces serious. My mom set me down on a chair, and that's when she gasped, her eyes widening in horror. I followed her gaze and saw it. A large piece of wood was lodged in the loose flesh of my leg, blood seeping around it. My body was covered in bruises and scrapes, some deep enough to bleed heavily. Until that moment, I hadn't felt any pain, my adrenaline masking it all. But as the reality sank in, tears streamed down my face, and I started to sob. The officers tried to calm me, explaining that an ambulance was on the way. They asked me to tell them what happened, their voices gentle but urgent. Stuttering through my tears, I recounted everything. How I'd hidden in the abandoned barn, how I woke up to find a man staring at me, how he'd come toward me, and how I'd broken through the wall to escape. I described him as best I could, his tired face and unsteady movements etched into my memory. The officers exchanged a glance, then headed to the barn to investigate. When they returned, their faces were pale, their expressions shaken. They didn't say much, just pulled my parents aside to talk in hushed tones. The conversation lasted a while, and I caught glimpses of my parents' faces growing more and more disturbed. The ambulance arrived, and paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, tending to my wounds as they wheeled me away. My parents stayed close, but they seemed rattled, their eyes wide with something like fear. At the hospital, doctors treated my injuries, removing the wood from my leg and bandaging the cuts and bruises. Once I was released and we went home, my parents refused to let me bring up the incident. I wasn't eager to relive it, but the memory lingered, a dark shadow in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the questions. What had the police found? Had the man escaped? Why did they look so disturbed? Years later, when I was nearly 18, I mustered the courage to ask my mom about that day. She stared at me, her face tightening as if weighing whether to tell me the truth. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice low. The police had told her that the man I described was found in the barn, slumped against the wall in the stable where I'd seen him. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, then said, "He was dead." My heart sank, my stomach twisting into knots. The police said he'd been dead for at least a couple of weeks, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm almost 18 now, and I still don't know what I saw that night. Was it my imagination, a trick of my narcoleptic mind? Or was it something else, something I can't explain? The memory of that man's tired eyes, staring at me in the dark, still haunts me. I don't know if I'll ever have answers, but the experience has left a mark I can't shake. This story takes place at a campsite in Kentucky, where I was staying with my dad. We lived in a tiny place, barely a town, just a cluster of hollers, as we called the narrow streets nestled between the mountains. Our home was in Grim Holler, a name that sounds spooky but was actually my grandmother's maiden name. We lived in a trailer with our closest neighbor, my Uncle Bob, about 1.5 miles up the road. My grandmother, born and raised in Kentucky, had passed away a few years before. I'd moved there from Iowa when I was 11, living with my dad and her. She'd lost a leg to diabetes, but even in her old age, she got around just fine without her wheelchair, though she'd yell at me for borrowing it to mess around. She was a fiery, superstitious woman, full of old gypsy-like beliefs. She'd warn me about things like never letting a pole come between you and someone you're walking with, saying it'd weaken your bond. Even now, at 24, with no religious beliefs, I catch myself following her quirky rules out of habit. About a year ago, I stumbled across a creepy pasta story that sent chills down my spine, the Goatman Tale. It stirred up memories I hadn't thought about in years, tying back to something that happened when I was younger. My grandmother used to share folklore with my older cousin, stories she'd grown up with. One night, my cousin told me about a creature that lived in the woods, a thing that lured people deep into the forest until they were lost forever. I was intrigued, but when I pressed for details, my grandmother overheard and got furious. She went off, ranting that talking about the creature was bad luck, that even mentioning it could summon it. Her reaction was so intense it freaked me out, but it also made me curious. I teased her, trying to get more information, but she shut down and refused to say another word. Later that night, my cousin filled me in on the rest of the story, whispering about the creature's tricks and the danger it posed. I listened, half skeptical, half fascinated. A few days passed, and I didn't give it much thought. Living in rural Kentucky, I was more worried about real threats like bobcats than some made-up monster. Our property was huge, and my dad had mowed a clearing in the tall grass to create a campsite about a quarter mile from the trailer. The grass was so high you couldn't see the trailer or anything else from the site, making it feel like its own secluded world. One evening, just after dark, we were at the campsite, cooking corn and hot dogs over a fire. My dad realized we'd forgotten the buns and headed back to the trailer to grab them, leaving me alone. I'd never liked the dark, and with Kentucky's wildlife, coyotes, owls, and who knows else, I was on edge, my eyes darting to the shadows beyond the fire's glow. As I sat there, I started hearing a strange sound, like someone muttering under their breath, a low, gritty hum. Then the tall grass in front of me began to move, rustling as if something was pushing through it. It was too dark to see what was causing it, and my heart started to race. I told myself it was just rabbits. They were everywhere. But the rustling grew louder, closer, right at the edge of the grass. Then came the smell, a sharp metallic stench, like beer cans tossed into a fire. It was so strong it stung my nose. The grass kept moving, and I noticed something else. The usual night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the hum of cicadas, the faint breeze had vanished. There was nothing but the rustling, an unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. I was frozen, staring into the dark, when I saw my dad coming back up the trail, his flashlight bobbing. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. He stormed over, clearly annoyed, and snapped, "Why'd you throw cans in the fire?" At 11, I wasn't allowed to do that. It was one of his rules. Confused, I protested. It wasn't me. The smell just came out of nowhere. He didn't believe me, his frown deepening as he sniffed the air, still heavy with that metallic tang. We planned to camp out, but my grandmother had heard on the news that rain was coming, so my dad doused the fire with water, and we packed up, leaving the small tent behind. I was secretly glad to head back to the trailer, away from the eerie rustling and that awful smell. That night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. Kentucky storms are something else, especially in the hollers, where the trees block out streetlights, leaving everything inky black. When lightning strikes, it lights up the world like midday for a split second, revealing everything before plunging it back into darkness. From our porch, I could see about 10 yards to the road, with a dense tree line pressed right against it. I loved watching storms, so I sat out there, wrapped in a blanket, mesmerized by the flashes. But I was still rattled from the campsite, the memory of the grass and the smell lingering. When the lightning struck again, I saw something that made my breath catch. Behind the first tree line, there was a figure standing with its back to the house. It was tall, humanoid, but indistinct in the brief flash. Then darkness swallowed it. I sat there, heart pounding, waiting for the next strike. The metallic smell returned, sharp and nauseating, creeping onto the porch. Another flash lit up the night, and the figure was closer now, just behind the first trees, still facing away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a person? An animal? I gripped the blanket, torn between fear and confusion. The next flash came, and I braced myself, half expecting the figure to be in the yard, staring at me. But when I scanned the trees, it was gone. No trace, no movement. Unnerved, I bolted inside the trailer, not wanting to see where this thing might appear next. In the kitchen, my grandmother was at the sink, washing dishes, her one leg steady as ever. She glanced over and asked, "Why aren't you watching the storm?" Her voice was casual, but I was trembling. "There's someone out there," I said, my voice shaky. In the woods, standing with their back to the house. Her face changed in an instant. With a speed I didn't think possible, she rushed to the back door and locked it, then hobbled past my dad, who was sprawled on the couch, to lock the front door. She barked at him to secure the windows. He grumbled, but after a few sharp words from her, he got up and did it. She grabbed my arm, pulled me into her room, and shut the door, her eyes wide with urgency. "Tell me everything," she demanded. I spilled it all. The muttering at the campsite, the rustling grass, the metallic smell, the figure in the woods. Her face grew grim, but she didn't say much, just told me to stay in her room that night. I didn't argue. The next morning, she made my dad stand with me at the bus stop for school. even though it was still dark out. We didn't camp again after that. When we checked the campsite, the tent was destroyed, torn to shreds, with holes like someone had taken scissors to it. My dad blamed the storm, but when Uncle Bob found the tent's zipper in his yard, a mile and a half away, even my dad got spooked. Reading about the Goatman years later brought it all back. I realized how close I'd been to something unexplainable, lurking just feet away in the grass. I wish my grandmother was still here so I could tell her I believe her now, but I'm sorry for mocking her stories. If you're ever in Woodinville, Kentucky, keep your eyes open. Something's out there, and it's not just the wildlife. I'm a senior in high school, navigating a mix of challenging AP classes and lighter electives to round out my schedule. The electives are a melting pot of students from different grades, so often find myself surrounded by unfamiliar faces. One class in particular stands out as a bright spot. I share it with my best friend. The teacher is fantastic, and the workload is manageable, making it a genuinely enjoyable experience. The discussions are lively, the other students are sharp and witty, and I've been acing the assignments, earning the teacher's approval. Nothing could dim my love for this class, or so I thought. That is, until I had to deal with a kid I sit next to, a guy I'll call Brian. From the first day, Brian rubbed me the wrong way. He has a habit of jumping into class conversations with pointless comments or terrible jokes he thinks are hilarious. When no one laughs, he'll repeat himself louder, as if we just didn't hear him. It's not that I think he has a disability, far from it. From what I can tell, his only issue is a complete lack of impulse control. At first, I brushed it off. I was getting an A, the class was fun, and I figured I could ignore him. But then things started to get weird, and Brian went from a minor annoyance to a genuine concern. The first incident came out of nowhere. Somehow, the topic of Islam came up in class, and Brian's usual goofy demeanor vanished. He launched into a vicious rant, spewing hateful nonsense about how Muslims were no-good psychos who blow up stuff and needed to be eradicated. His words were venomous, dripping with a rage I hadn't seen in him before. I was more angry than scared, stunned by the intensity of his outburst. Thankfully, the bell rang soon after, cutting him off. For the rest of the day, I joked with my friend about how absurd and idiotic his comments were, trying to laugh it off. By the next day, the incident had faded to the back of my mind, but it was far from the last time Brian lost it. I started noticing his explosive temper. He slept through class almost every day, which the teacher frowned upon. The first time someone tried to wake him, the kid sitting behind him gave him a gentle nudge. Brian snapped, going absolutely ballistic. He screamed at the kid, calling him a jerk, telling him to suck it, and hurling insults like, "Go screw yourself." His voice was so loud it echoed in the room, and his face twisted with fury. I'd seen guys in high school get into shouting matches before, but this was different. The outburst was so unhinged, so disproportionate to the minor disturbance, it left everyone stunned. The poor kid who woke him looked shell-shocked, and the rest of us just sat there, unsure what to do. As time went on, Brian's behavior got worse, especially as more classmates grew fed up with him. One girl, who I'll call Catherine, seemed to have a personal vendetta. Almost every day, she'd turn around in her seat, fire off a sharp insult at Brian, and then face forward again, ignoring him. It became a routine, but it was like poking a hornet's nest. Each time she did it, I'd brace myself, watching Brian's face transform into a mask of pure rage. His eyes would narrow, his jaw clenching so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Then he'd start muttering under his breath, his voice low and venomous. I couldn't always make out the words, but what I did hear sent chills down my spine. Threats, curses, and dark, incoherent ramblings that sounded like they came from someone much older, much angrier. Brian's outbursts became more frequent, each one more unsettling than the last. I tried to tune him out, focusing on the class and my friends, but it was hard to ignore the growing tension. Then, one day, things took a darker turn. Brian was reading a book during a lesson, ignoring the discussion. Someone told him to put it down and pay attention, and he exploded. "I'm paying attention," he roared, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it, shaking with raw fury. The entire class went silent, and even the teacher looked rattled. Brian kept screaming, his words a jumbled mess of anger, until the teacher finally managed to calm him down. When he stopped, he slumped in his seat, both hands gripping his head, eyes squeezed shut. He started hissing, shut up," over and over, the sound so malicious it made my skin crawl. I couldn't look at him. It was too disturbing, like watching someone unravel. My concerns spiked during a group assignment. We formed a group of 8 based on where we were sitting, and Brian was part of it. The task itself went fine, but afterward, we got sidetracked, chatting about our plans after high school. My friend and I, the only seniors in the group, were the ones with clear ideas. My friend shared that she planned to join the military to pay for college, a practical choice given her situation. Brian, who'd been quiet, suddenly spoke up, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I want to go into the military because I want to know what it's like to kill people," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. We all froze, exchanging uneasy glances. If he'd said it with a smirk or a laugh, we might have brushed it off as a bad joke. But his tone was dead serious, like he was stating a simple fact, like he'd had toast for breakfast. I tried to diffuse the tension, saying, "Even if you join the military, you're not likely to kill anyone." He didn't respond with words, but his face twisted with anger, real, seething anger, at the idea of not getting to kill. I'd never seen someone look so furious about something so morbid, and it shook me. After that, my friend and I started joking about Brian, half laughing that he'd probably shoot up the school one day, and hoping he'd at least wait until we graduated. But the humor was a mask for our growing unease. Every time Brian stood up, asked to go to the bathroom, or reached into his backpack, we'd flinch, our hearts racing with a mix of fear and suspicion. We didn't trust him, and the more we thought about his behavior, the more we realized he wasn't just annoying, he was dangerous. Last week, Brian didn't show up for class. At first, we assumed he was absent, but high school gossip spreads fast. Word got around that he'd been suspended, with possible criminal charges pending. My friend and I were stunned, but we didn't know the details. Curiosity got the better of me, so I asked a few kids in his grade what had happened. I figured he'd gotten into a fight or mouthed off to a teacher, something in line with his temper. But what I learned hit me like a punch to the gut. Brian had threatened to shoot up the school, starting with our class. The news left me reeling, my stomach churning with a mix of fear and vindication. Our jokes hadn't been far off, and that realization was terrifying. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd been to someone so unhinged, someone who'd sat next to me every day, muttering threats and harboring a darkness I hadn't fully grasped until it was too late. Ever since I was a kid, I've encountered things that defy rational explanation. I consider myself a skeptic, and for the sake of conversation, often describe myself as a spiritual atheist. By that, I mean I don't believe in a creator, supreme being, or intelligent design. I don't dismiss those who do, but nothing in my life has pointed me toward a higher power. That said, I do believe in some kind of spiritual energy, maybe a form of thermodynamics that lingers beyond what we can measure. Beyond that, I'm not sure what I believe or don't. One of my earliest memories is from when I was about 5, living in the rugged Guam Islands of Alaska. I was in my father's office, restless and bored while he briefed his team. Staring out the window, I gazed up a hill toward the tank farm, a cluster of large silos that stored fuel. A promenade wound down from the farm, and as I watched, 2 figures appeared, a woman and a child, hand in hand, dressed in early 20th century clothing. The woman wore a long high-neck dress, and the child had on a cap and knickers, like something out of an old photograph. They walked down a path, passing the window just a few feet from where I sat. I blinked, and they were gone, vanishing into thin air. I wasn't scared, just puzzled, my young mind trying to make sense of it. I didn't tell anyone, but I asked my dad if anyone lived up by the tank farm, or if there were other buildings. He said no, just a cemetery on the hill. The answer stuck with me, a quiet mystery I tucked away. Growing up in Alaska, we were always prepared for natural disasters. Earthquake drills and tsunami evacuation plans were second nature, and we kept 3-day survival packs ready at all times. My mom woke me up countless nights when quakes hit, the ground rumbling beneath us. The biggest I remember was a 6.9, strong enough to make your heart race. After every quake, we'd evacuate to the school, perched on one of the island's highest points. It was routine, but it left me hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on edge for the next tremor. When I was in third grade, we moved to a small town in the North Cascade Mountains, near the US-Canada border. Our new home was unsettling from the start. Before we moved in, the previous tenants had been busted in a major drug raid. The DEA and FBI had swooped in, seizing nearly 400 kilos of cocaine. The house belonged to our family, and with nowhere else to go, we had no choice but to move in after the authorities cleared out. The place was a wreck, garbage strewn everywhere, furniture smashed, beds and tables reduced to splinters. I remember looking around and telling my mom, "We're living in a dump." I was so upset I cried. She'd saved a few $1,000s from selling her small business in Alaska, and we poured it into fixing the place up. It took blood, sweat, and tears, but we got it livable. Life settled into a new normal, or so I thought. One night, I woke from a deep sleep to loud banging on the front door. Still groggy, I stumbled to answer it and found a woman standing there, covered in blood, her clothes torn, and her face pale. Without thinking, I let her in, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around her, guiding her to the dining room table. I sat her down, then ran to my mom's room to wake her. Looking back, I laugh at the absurdity of it, an 8-year-old waking his mom to say he'd let a blood-soaked stranger into the house. She panicked, rushing out to assess the situation. The woman, in her mid-20s, was drunk and had crashed her car. After regaining consciousness, she'd walked over a mile, knocking on 3 or 4 houses before reaching ours. Her memory was fuzzy, but she was lucky to be alive. My mom called for help, and medics arrived, bandaging her wounds and whisking her away on a gurney with a neck brace. Later, my mom sat me down, her voice firm but kind, explaining I shouldn't let strangers in, especially not in the middle of the night, and definitely not if they're covered in blood. She hugged me, though, saying I'd done a good thing. Without me, the woman might have died from blood loss or hypothermia. I never learned what happened to her, but I felt a quiet pride in helping someone. Life went back to normal, but about a month later, I started waking up in the middle of the night with an eerie feeling, like someone was watching me. I'd sit up in bed, scanning the dark, but the house was silent. Then I'd notice the motion sensor floodlight in the driveway outside my window was on, casting a harsh glow through the blinds. I shrugged it off, figuring it was a deer or raccoon, and went back to sleep. For a week, nothing happened, and I let it go. But the next week, I started waking up at exactly 3:15 a.m., night after night, with that same uneasy sensation. Each time, the floodlight was on, its beams slicing through the darkness. I started sleeping with my head under the blanket to block the light, and for a while, I slept through the night again. A month passed without incident. Then, one evening around 8:30 p.m., I was on the couch watching TV, the hallway to my bedroom visible in my peripheral vision. That watched feeling returned, stronger than ever. I glanced down the hall and saw a shadow, a figure standing just to the right of my bedroom doorway. My heart skipped, but I closed my eyes, telling myself it wasn't real. When I opened them, the shadow was gone. Shaking it off, I chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks and went to bed, brushing the moment aside. At 3:15 a.m., I woke again, the familiar dread settling over me. The floodlight was on, as always, but this time something was different. As I sat up, I heard footsteps, distinct, deliberate, moving out of my bedroom, down the hallway, past the washer and dryer, and into the living room. I froze, my pulse racing. Covering my head with a blanket, I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to sleep. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd been walking around in the night. She looked puzzled and said, "Of course not." "Why?" I mumbled. I thought I heard something, and she reassured me it was probably the house settling. It sounded reasonable, so I let it go. A few days passed quietly, but then it happened again. At 3:15 a.m., that same oppressive feeling woke me, the floodlight glaring outside. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to drift off. Just as I was slipping back to sleep, my bed shook violently, like someone had grabbed it and yanked. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and heard footsteps retreating down the hall. In a daze, I stumbled out of bed, half asleep and assuming it was my mom waking me for an earthquake, a reflex from our Alaska days. I followed the sound to the living room, expecting to find her, but there was nothing, just moonlight streaming through the blinds, the room eerily silent. I stood there, trying to process what had happened, then ran back to my room, diving under the covers like a scared kid. The next morning, my mom noticed I looked exhausted. I asked if she'd been in my room, if she'd moved my bed. Her face went pale when she realized I was serious. She brushed it off, saying it was the house settling again, but her voice lacked conviction. That night, I slept undisturbed, but when I woke, I found my mom in the dining room, her eyes bloodshot, hands trembling around her coffee mug. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. It woke me up. We didn't say anything else, the weight of her words hanging between us. After that, the intense incident stopped, but I kept seeing shadows in the hallway from time to time, fleeting shapes that vanished when I looked closer. I'd wake up at least once a week at 3:15 a.m., the floodlight always on, the silence heavy. Eventually, we moved to a town in Oregon. On our first day in the new house, I was watching TV on the couch while my mom was in the dining room, a narrow kitchen between us. Out of nowhere, the lid of the wastebasket, a heavy plastic flipper, flew across the room and slammed into the opposite wall. The basket itself didn't move. My mom and I stared at each other in silence, the air thick with unease. After a long moment, she broke the tension, saying, "That must be the welcoming committee." We laughed, but it was forced. That was the only incident I experienced in that house, though I often heard footsteps above my basement bedroom, even when I knew no one was home. Friends who came over would later say they felt claustrophobic or suffocated in my room, some refusing to stay for sleepovers. My mom described the house as active when I was away for summer visits with my dad, but she wouldn't elaborate, only admitting she'd hidden in her bedroom corner more than once. In high school, we moved to a small house near the Puget Sound. My bedroom was tiny, barely fitting a twin bed and a desk, tucked behind a narrow laundry room and water closet. I joked that I slept in a hole behind the water heater. The room had a sliding door I could lock and two awning windows without screens. I propped one open with a drumstick for fresh air, sometimes sneaking out at night to meet friends for parties. To climb back in, I'd use a sawhorse to reach the 6-foot-high window. At night, I started hearing footsteps outside, distinct and bipedal, not like deer. I dismissed it at first, but the sound was too human, too deliberate. One day, I had friends over to jam, playing thrash metal and punk rock in the living room. In the middle of a song, a loud shriek pierced through the music, clear even over the guitars, drums, and bass. We stopped, looking at each other. I asked the bassist, "Was that you?" He shook his head, saying, "I thought it was you." The guitarist, pale, said, "You guys are messing with me, right?" None of us had made the sound. The jam session ended abruptly, and they left spooked. Weeks later, I was in my bedroom, chatting online at my computer. Glancing up, I saw two red eyes staring through the window. My heart stopped. I shut off the computer, killed the lights, and grabbed a knife, crouching in the dark. The eyes turned and moved away. Later that night, I heard a low growl outside. I never left the window open again. A few weeks after, I had a vivid dream, a disembodied voice screaming at me to get out, go away. I yelled back, refusing to leave, claiming the house as mine. When I woke, I was sore and exhausted. In the bathroom, I noticed small bruises on my arm, forming a handprint, the thumb pointing toward my elbow, as if someone had grabbed me from behind. I tried contorting my arm to see if I could have done it myself, but it was impossible. Then, in the mirror, I saw 3 long scratches down my spine, from neck to lower back. From then on, I avoided that house as much as possible, crashing at friends' places. My doctor prescribed selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for stress and paranoia, and life has been quieter since. I work full-time now, raising a child in elementary school, and haven't experienced anything paranormal in years. Sometimes I wonder if the meds dulled some perception I once had, or if it was all just stress, anxiety, and depression playing tricks. I lean toward the former, but I'm not sure. All I know is when I saw glowing red eyes from a 7-foot creature, bruises and scratches that appeared while I slept in a locked room. As a skeptic, I question anyone else's story like this, calling it nonsense. But these events have haunted me for years, and I can't shake the feeling there's more to it than I'll ever understand.